That was when we were on our way to play Fisherman's Wharf.
I see.
There was something or other. What could it have been? Longshoreman's Hall. That's it, Longshoreman's Hall.
And what was it like playing there for the first time?
That was really fascinating because here were, in addition to people who liked all kinds of rock and roll music, there were a lot of what we call teeny boppers. I mean, bunches and bunches and bunches and bunches of them, and we'd never had that because we'd mostly played, men's drinking places, and we'd never seen bunches of young girls, and they were being carried out fainting. They would faint when the Elevators were playing. We couldn't believe it, and we were all in shock about it, but you know who got enormously upset was Stacy. Stacy got very, very, very upset.
And why was this?
He said, "This is not good. This is not good. Young girls should not be fainting. This is bad. This is bad in so many ways. This is bad because it's bad. It's a bad omen that they're fainting. That this is not good for young girls to be fainting. It's bad for them, and it's bad for us because that's not the kind of audience we're trying to attract. We're trying to attract musicians." He kept saying, "I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be popular. I don't want to be heard everywhere. I want for musicians to respect me. I want other musicians to respect me." And Tommy kept saying similar things. He said, "I don't want to be pop star. We don't want the Elevators to be the biggest thing. We want it to be respected by people who are really serious about music. People who are really serious about music." Which of course happened once they started playing in places like the Avalon or the Fillmore, because that wasn't all teeny boppers. These were people who were very like ourselves. They were hippies and they were really serious into music, and they got high on LSD, and they truly loved the music. It was not a star thing. They weren't, they loved the music. They didn't love us. Whereas these teeny boppers were in love with Rocky or in love with Stacy or something like that, and it was horrifying to Stacy or something like that, and it was horrifying to Stacy.
Were you performing with the Elevators there?
No, I never. I refused to perform, except like on one record. On one record, I was willing to do a harmony because there was only Rocky and me when that was being recorded in the studio. There was no one else who could get to harmonize, and I said, "Okay, all right, I'll do a harmony." I had to tell you, I sang harmony on that one because I had two small children, and I felt a couple of things I felt very strongly about. One of them was these guys had such incredible musical ability, and I did not want to trivialize it by inserting myself into it. That would make it trivial as far as I was concerned. This was really serious music, and I'd do anything to help it. And I was a mother of two small children, but I was also a mother of the band. I was not that much older than Rocky, but he was my teenage son.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, those guys were my kids, and I had to make sure that they were fed. I had to make sure that they got to bed. I had to make sure that they didn't fight with each other. I was constantly trying to keep peace between them because they were guys in a small space, who were going to get on each other's nerves.
How would you describe Tommy's relationship with Rocky?
At one time, somebody was explaining to us about some categories that people could be put into, and they looked at me and they said, "You're the queen," which I accepted. I accepted that because I tended to be bossy. I was a bossy young woman, and I tended to try to get everybody to get riches. I was really looking for them to really succeed, and they said Tommy was the sage. Somehow, astrologically, he came out the sage. And he truly was a sage. He really was a wise man. And Rocky was the child. And Rocky had all that, the innocence and the wonder and the tremendous enthusiasm of a child. Totally childlike. The most childlike person I think I've ever met in my life. Extremely enthusiastic. Not to give you the idea that he was helpless or anything like that. Not in the least. He was extremely aware and extremely gifted, but very childlike about it. Now, if Tommy had been the parent and Rocky had been the child, that would have worked out extremely well. That would have been perfect, because Rocky was looking for a father. But instead of getting a father, he got the sage, and the sage doesn't tolerate a child perfectly. He can love the child, but the perfect person for a sage to teach would be the student, not the child. And the perfect parent for a child is not the sage, it would be a father. It's not the sage, it would be a father. Anyhow, Stacy was the dark angel, which suited him perfectly. These people were absolutely right about that.
And how would you explain that?
Because he was so good-hearted, but he was haunted by horrible, horrible, horrible things that had been instilled in him from the time he was tiny. I have good impressions of his mother, but I have very bad impressions of his grandmother. Just from the things he said to me, he would say things like, I know I'm going to end up in prison and I'm going to be raped many times. I know that. I have to fight devils every day of my life, just like my grandmother. She's always fighting devils. His grandmother used to have every kind of detective magazine in her home possible, and she knew that if she stepped out that door, she was going to get raped, and she was going to get scalped, and she was going to get ground up into ground beef. I mean, she had these horrible, horrible things that were on her mind all the time, and she passed them on to Stacy. And Stacy, who was one of the dearest, sweetest people in the whole world, had these awful, scary things in his mind.
Did you see that translated in his musicianship?
I think so. I think there was a piercingness about his music, and there was also that terrible sweetness, too, the angelic sweetness of the music. But there was a piercing, and when Stacy was offended, he was so deeply offended that it was really, really hard to even speak to him at all. I offended him badly, badly one time without even intending to, and he said, Clementine, you have insulted me to my soul. And it was a week or so before he would even bear to be around me because I had hurt him so badly. And it was something said in total innocence, but you couldn't convince him of that. So he was very pessimistic. He expected the most horrible things to happen at all times, and yet he managed to wrestle some kind of beauty and some kind of sweetness into his music.
The other members of the Elevators at the time, I believe, were Benny Thurman and John Ike Walton. Could you, elaborate on their contributions and what happened to them?
Well, John Ike... Benny was a real dear guy. Benny was a sweetheart. He was a classically trained bass player, and he could play jazz. The difficulty with that, and the reason I'm telling you this is it shows what John Ike contributed. Because Benny would mostly play like a jazz bass, like do like that, and wasn't a rock and roll bass player at all, or a blues bass player at all. There was a pulse of some kind that was completely missing from the bass playing in the music, and John Ike would put that in with the drums. He would not just use drums as a percussion instrument, but he was also doing things with the drums, almost playing melodies on the drums. It's too hard to describe, but you know it when you hear it. He was playing the bass part on his drums, while at the same time playing the drum part on his drums. And so he was absolutely brilliant drum player. Another person who I deeply respect and who knew the Elevators very, very well was Sandy Lockett. If you ever get a chance to interview Sandy Lockett, or if any of the people you know get to interview Sandy Lockett, I have him on a videotape.
How is he involved?
He's the one who set up all the music. He was our soundy, I guess, in the beginning, because we couldn't afford anybody. One of the things he was extremely skilled at was sound equipment. Not skilled enough to do it professionally forever, but extremely valuable to us because we could afford nothing, and he was damn good. He also loved and knew the Elevators individually and as a group. He and I had been extremely close friends and just dearly loved each other as friends. I loved him and his wife of the time, and I had met him in an English class, and he was an English major, and brilliant one, and he and I immediately became kindred spirits. And when I discovered that he had ability with sound, then I immediately brought him over to the band because we didn't have any money to spend on anybody, and he was willing to do it for a pittance. So, and he's also if you ever try to think of a gentleman of the Old South, slow in speech, brilliant in mind, but slow in speech, and with a warm heart, That's Sandy Lockett. He is so courtly and so gentlemanly. He comes from old money, from Houston, but he absolutely was a lovely, lovely person to deal with in any way, shape, or form, and he was enormously helpful to the elevators when they had no money at all. Enormously helpful to the elevators when they had no money at all.